So this is Louis, and I might have accidentally screwed myself for later today. I actually planned on recording another commentary, a scripted commentary, but I've damaged my voice from, in essence, just yelling into my phone because I'm currently on the job. Ironically enough, as it relates to this commentary, I'm on the job and I wanted to record a commentary in reference to this video by Kyle Kalinske on the UN issuing some kind of declaration or whatever it is that it is, where they're calling upon the United States to institute some kind of reparations system where you'd have working class white people and Asians and Latinos that bear no responsibility for the atrocities of the past to pay black people for something they haven't suffered. It's frustrating because it's so obvious to someone that is not ideologically motivated that this is not something that can happen. It's something that is not feasible. And the reason for that is because most black people are likely to be from families like mine, where they can't trace their history back past probably 100 or so years. They can't trace it back that far. So on to say that you're going to pay back people that have suffered an atrocity 200 years ago, well, who is that? Who are their descendants? We don't even know. I can't trace my family's history back that far. And I know a lot of people that are the same way because they immigrated from the countries that they were originally from, and they've moved here. They traveled to this country. They've kept records afterwards, but beforehand, you're hard pressed to find a real explanation of where people are from and who their family members were, who their ancestors were. The other problem is that there's no means testing to this. There's no testing to say who's going to be footing the bill and who's going to be the recipient of reparations. A good example would be my family, which has always been working class. You can go back as far as you could possibly go in my family's history. We've always been working class, if not poor. Even today, I have a great deal of my father's side of the family that lives in the projects, who are all dirt poor, that are scraping by. You're looking at those kind of people, my family members, and you're asking them, or if it's reparations, it's not even asking, it's going to be forcing my poor family members to pay people, in the case of reparations, to people like Jonathan Butler, who is a racist, lunatic, so-called activist from Mizzou, who has severely damaged that campus and that university based on overblown nonsense of racism on that campus. And he is the son of a multi-millionaire corporate executive. So what you'll be insisting upon, Kyle, is my poor family pay reparations to Jonathan Butler's family for something they can't prove. They won't be able to prove that their ancestry is based upon slaves. They could have immigrated here at any given point. They don't really know. They haven't gone back that far. But even if they were able to prove it, that's what you're calling upon. You're calling upon my poor family members to pay this guy money for something that I had nothing to do with. My ancestors had nothing to do with, and that's what we'll be moving on to next before we even address this video. My ancestors are all from foreign countries, okay? I have family members that are from Quebec, from England, from Ireland, from at least one or two Dutch countries. None of my ancestors, none of them, are native-born Americans. None of them, in terms of their ancestry. Like, they didn't come over with the WASPs and settle this country, okay? They're not. None of them are Protestants. None of them. So that should give you an idea of who, the fact that my ancestors were immigrants. None of them are Protestant. They came to this country, and they came here with nothing. None of them had any money. None of them. My grandfather, I've already talked about him in the past. He came to this country and got drafted and fought in World War II for this country. He barely had his foot in the fucking country before he got drafted and fought and nearly died for this country and stayed here, built a home, got a job, worked hard, worked himself into an early grave. My father is even from even more tragic circumstances in terms of being poor. I won't actually get into that, but my father likely is going to put himself as well in an early grave for how hard he worked to provide for my family. And what you're saying is that my father and my mother, two working class people, and myself, a working class man, I need to pay back black people for something that they haven't suffered. Something that, and I mean this, I've had many black friends over the years. I mean, it's hard not to have black friends when you grow up outside of a major city. Buffalo has a very large black population. I have black friends. I've known a lot of black people. I don't know any of them that have ever asked for reparations or even have hinted at reparations. None of them. None of them have ever had any kind of conversation about it. It's always been white liberals. It's always been white liberals that have been talking about this. I've never heard one black person that I've known ever bring this up. It's always been a white liberal. And I'm not even going to get into the UN portion of this because that's where I'll start screaming again and my voice is already strained. I don't want to do that because ultimately with the UN, I'm surprised they found the time to issue this kind of thing in between, calling upon governments to censor artists like the Japanese government, for instance, and not talking at all about the history of slavery in the Middle East and that part of the world, and Malaysia and countries today that are still doing it. And, let's just check the record of which were the last few countries to get rid of slavery and which ones still haven't really gotten rid of it. Let's not talk about anything like that. Let's just shit on the United States for nothing. That's my opinion of the UN. I honestly think that something like the UN is good. It's a good ideal to have. I think that the UN could serve a greater purpose, but as someone that has completely discarded any notion of world peace, any stupid utopian delusion like that, I've completely removed that from my philosophy, because this issue is the kind of thing that proves that to be total bullshit. Because notice what the UN focuses on. Notice what they don't talk about. Notice what they do talk about. And now understand that this is the same fucking organization that you think is going to be able to achieve world peace. It's fucking stupid. The UN is fucking worthless. And I'll just leave it at that, otherwise I'm going to start yelling. So let's get to your video, Kyle, because there are several things in this that I need to address. And because my voice is strained, maybe this is sort of like a blessing that my voice is now fucked up, because, I do want to send this to you. I want you to understand that you are not only wrong on this, that, maybe I won't even get into it. Like, you have a twisted idea of what the white working class needs to do for blacks, and how collectivist you are, how racist you are even in this, and how punitive you are to people that aren't, you're going to force Asians to participate in this, you're going to force Latinos to participate in this, you're going to force all these minorities to participate, even Middle Easterners, all the people that are in this country that are not fucking black. You're going to make them pay reparations to black people that they don't deserve it, haven't earned it, and the fact is that the people that you're making pay had nothing to do with this. They had nothing to do with what happened 200 years ago. This is just punitive. This is a racist fucking thing. This is terrible. You should be against this. And this is the thing that makes you not an egalitarian. So when you say I'm an egalitarian, fuck that, man. You're not. You're not an egalitarian. You're a fucking racist, bro. Just because you think, oh, I'm a racist in the right way, fuck you, man. Fuck you. Fuck your new version of the white man's burden. Fuck off, man. There are things that greater society, the rest of the United States can do to help black people, poor black people, poor people in general. There's things that we can do to help that community. But this isn't one of them. It's not egalitarian.
The United Nations weighed in on the state of race relations in the U.S., and they had some pretty harsh things to say. So first and foremost, they said that the U.S. owes black people reparations for slavery. Now, what led them to, having this conversation or releasing the statements that they released is, of course, the slew of unarmed black people who have been killed in the U.S.
That's not the same fucking issue. Go to Buffalo and see the police department there. You have Asian women, black men and women. It is so multiracial. It's inconceivable, okay? But it's because Buffalo is such a multiracial city that you have multiracial officers. It's not just all white guys. Maybe you can say that about the Midwest or something. You can't say that about my area. A lot of the cops, outside of the smaller cities are white. the more rural you get, they tend to be more white. But I haven't heard any complaints about them being racist. I haven't heard any complaints about them doing anything dirty. I have heard complaints about the, Buffalo cops, but they're already multiracial. So what do you want? If you want to talk about discrimination, you have to talk about discrimination. If you want to talk about historical discrimination, that's what you have to talk about. You can't talk about bad policing practices that may or may not be targeting blacks. Okay? Because you go on in this video to say that police also discriminate against poor whites, which sinks everything you just said. Okay, maybe I'll splice that clip in where you talk about it.
Not only people of color in this country, but also poor white people in this country when it comes to the drug war. So black people, minorities are disproportionately targeted, but there are also a lot of poor white people who are in jail as a result of criminalizing substances.
Is there or is there not discrimination by cops on blacks? Or is this a poor thing? Because that's what I honestly think it is. There are racist cops, and there are police precincts and departments that have bad culture. I see a lot of liberals trying to make this a race issue when maybe it would be in certain circumstances, but when you conflate it to be every circumstance, you can't even make the argument anymore. Like, I can't say that I'm on your side or I agree in any way when you make the issue so big and so general that I can just say, okay, well, that's demonstrably not true. When you defeat your own fucking argument or the UN's own argument in the beginning of this video, is that not enough to call into question whether this is actually necessary or not, or justify it in any way? But you just breeze on right through it, man. And this is what I mean. Like this is a massive hole in your thinking, and you don't even seem aware of it at all.
So they came out and said, you know what? You still owe reparations for slavery.
Who owes fucking reparations, you asshole? You include whites and see that as justified, but what about all these other fucking people? Are you going to tell some guy that's a descendant of some, Chinese immigrant whose ancestor died working on the railroads? Are you going to tell them about how they need to pay back reparations to black people? Is that what you're fucking telling me, bro? There's no efficacy to what you're talking about here, man. There is zero means to make this fucking happen. This is just a fucking 100-year-long circle jerk by white liberals to shame other white people. I can't fucking stand it anymore. Make this shit end. Stop talking about this. Stop bringing it up. I don't hear black people doing it. I hear you doing it, Kyle. I hear you and the fucking UN, who can fuck right off. Why don't they go waste some more money telling Japanese people that they need to censor their government needs to censor their own citizens and artists more. That's where they should waste their fucking time and money. Not telling me how I need to pay back black people for nothing. How me and other immigrants who had nothing to do with fucking anything, who have to pay back black people for no good goddamn reason.
And they also, quote, expressed concern over the unresolved legacy of colonial history, enslavement, racial subordination and segregation, racial terrorism, and racial inequality.
All different, nothing to do with the original notion of reparations because of slavery. You gotta pick one fucking issue and stick with it. Again, this is the UN, but this again should give you a sign that this is bullshit. This is disingenuous at best.
I should be clear, though, and mention that what they mean by reparations is pretty vague and pretty unclear. And in fact, if anything, they allude to it not being what you think it is. They say it may include, quote, elements of an apology and a form of debt relief to the descendants of enslaved people.
Am I a citizen or am I a fucking bank? What the fuck is debt relief? What do I have anything to do with someone else's debt? I have my own goddamn debt. What is this?
But on the one hand, you look at it, and look, it's fair to say, I never fucking owned slaves. No living white person in the United States owned slaves. And no living black person in the United States right now was a slave. So, one argument is, that's not, what are you gonna do? Punish people who had nothing to do with it and reward people who had nothing to do with it and have no first-hand experience?
And that should be the end of the fucking argument as it relates to reparations. If you want to talk about helping the black community, that is a wholly separate argument, because in many ways that could just be an egalitarian argument and even a liberal or leftist argument in favor of helping poor families, working class families, working families, okay? But for whatever reason, white liberals need this to be about black people.
But on the other hand, the argument would be, well, look, the U.S. did 245 years of slavery, where black people were just literally treated as property, and they were property in the eyes of the law. Then they promised them compensation in the form of 40 acres and a mule. They never gave them shit.
I can't help what happened 200 fucking years ago in a fucking broken promise, and a broken campaign promise. I can't help that.
There was also, 100 years of segregation and Jim Crow after that, and then blacks have only been free on paper all across America for 50 years, right? So about 1965 is when we're talking, then is segregation. And it's not like, by the way, okay, segregation is over, and now everybody all of a sudden views everybody in an egalitarian way and everybody's equal. Like, that didn't happen. We wish that was the case. On paper, it was the case. Like, okay, now everybody's equal. But look, that wasn't the mentality. So you had 65, 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015. Yeah, so about 50 years, a little over 50 years, is how long on paper. So, I mean, if you really look at the scope of it, slavery went on for a really long time. Jim Crow and segregation went on for a really long time, and we're still, like, in the baby phase of, on paper even, having free black people all around America. And then, obviously, you bring up the aspect of mass incarceration, and you go, well, how really free are not only people of color in this country, but also poor white people in this country when it comes to the drug war?
So in this part, he actually defeats his own argument, and I'm just going to skip it.
So black people, minorities are disproportionately targeted, but there are also a lot of poor white people who are in jail as a result of criminalizing substances. So now, again, people could still look at that argument and they go, okay, but still today, no white people that are alive were slave owners, no black people were slaves, so the whole conversation is an unfair conversation. Why are we even having it? That's the argument some people would make. But again, the counter-argument to that is the effects of that system, which existed for so long, we are still feeling today. Now, people could deny it, but they're just wrong.
My family has never been rich. My family has always been poor or working class. My family has not benefited from the quote-unquote system. Okay? My family has not benefited. The vast, overwhelming majority of white Americans have not benefited from the fucking patriarchy, from the white supremacy that just hands white people checks for being white. We don't benefit from it.
So, for example, when you look at inherited wealth, so when you look at average white net worth versus average black net worth, for white people, it's $142,000.
I've already made a commentary where I addressed this exact claim, and if any money is being inherited, it is through property. It is through bonds or whatever else, and that is taxed. Those things are being taxed as income, and those things are not, they're typically not liquid income. So it's just not money in my pocket. Even if it were, it's taxed. My grandfather built his own home with his own hands on land that he bought with money from fighting in the Second World War. Like, are you going to denigrate that, Kyle? Are you going to denigrate the fact that my grandfather nearly died to earn his fucking keep, used that money to buy land and build his own fucking home? That my parents, after he died, after my grandmother died, they sold that home. Are you going to tell me that I'm not entitled, my parents are not entitled to the money off of that property? The fact that my grandfather fought for this country and worked himself into an early grave to support his family. Are you going to tell me that my grandfather benefited from a system that sent him to a fucking war that he almost died in?
For black people, it's $11,000. So there is a gigantic disparity. Now, in all seriousness, you'll have silly people will look at it and say, well, that's just because white people work harder and black people lazy. Yeah, but except I just told you this is white net worth versus black net worth. Inheritance is a tremendous part of that. So in other words, if segregation is only about 50 years old, that means there are people living today who grew up under segregation. Their parents didn't have any wealth to fucking pass down to them because that's the way the system was designed. So they were left behind by design.
I'm glad that there are safety nets for poor people today. I want those systems to exist, not just from a moral perspective, which is a major portion of why I think those safety nets should exist, but also from a point of efficacy. It's not good to have no Social Security and tons of poor elderly people. It's not good to have people that get injured on a job and not have any kind of workers' compensation, or people that get laid off or whatever and there be no unemployment. It's not a good system. And I can say that my family has benefited from those two systems, and even welfare. I have family members that have benefited from welfare. I am fine with there being food stamps and Social Security and everything else. I think that those resources, those safety nets are necessary in a decent society. I think you can justify safety nets through economic arguments, through moral arguments, through efficacy arguments, based on even stuff related to crime. If you don't have anywhere to turn, for income, you will turn to crime. And I would wager that if you got rid of welfare and Social Security and everything else, like a lot of right-wingers want to do, and libertarians too, that you would have a major increase in crime, because you'd have people turning to crime. Because there are a lot of elderly people that shoplift and shit. I know this from working in retail myself. I know people that have worked at pharmacies and that who said that elderly people shoplift all the time. I mean, I've heard you say yourself that healthcare is a major problem in this country in terms of cost, and I agree. But you have to keep in mind, that, again, these are all notions that fall under an egalitarian system. Like, Social Security was not implemented to discriminate against blacks. Welfare in the same way, not discriminatory against whites versus blacks versus Latinos versus whoever. If you want to talk about before all these systems existed, you can go right ahead and do that, okay? Maybe you'd have a justified argument there. But, there are safety nets in this country. So, and there's been affirmative action for 50 or 60 years. Legitimate affirmative action towards blacks to discriminate against everyone else. And there's all kinds of sponsorships. And I forget what they're called, where you fill out an essay and they cut you a check, whatever the fuck that's called. I can't even remember. I had none of them when I went to college. I knew a friend that he went to Catholic school and he got all kinds of sponsorships or whatever they're called. A lot of them today are based on race and gender. A good example is the ESA. They're hardly the only one, but they're the one that comes to mind for me, that they have one of these kind of, things, these benefits or whatever, where they give it to you, and you can't be white. You can't be a white male. You could be fucking anyone else, and you can get this fucking thing. But if you are a white male, you're not allowed to even participate. And you're trying to tell me that this is still a problem for black people, where they got all the same safety nets that I do. They have all these different things where they're getting a step ahead. It's like saying, oh man, women are so discriminated against in tech. It's like that same argument, bro. You haven't been paying attention for the last 50 years. You haven't been watching what's been going on about how everyone and their grandmother, other than the fucking white man, is getting a handout, and is getting help, and is getting sponsored, and is getting all kinds of benefits and all this shit thrown in their way. But it's the white guy that's supposed to make it on his own. And that's me. I've done it. I've made it on my own. I'm still within the working class. If I want to credit anybody, I can look in a fucking mirror. I didn't have to earn any kind of fucking special sponsorship or whatever else from some other person just because of my fucking identity. Everything that I have, I either owe to my parents and my parents' upbringing or myself. That's who's responsible for what I fucking have. Myself and my family. Because you can't credit the government for all these other things. Like, if you want to say, like, it's a good thing that Social Security exists, yeah, I agree. But it's not racist. It's not discriminatory. Well, it's a good thing that welfare exists. Yeah, I agree. But that's not discriminatory. Well, it's a good thing that workers' compensation and unemployment exists. Again, I agree, it's not discriminatory, and yet you still want there to be more. You want there to be fucking discriminatory benefits for people that don't fucking deserve them. You want to help out poor people? I agree, but that's not race-based. There's all kinds of fucking poor people in this country. Stop making it about race. You're the one making it about race. You're not an egalitarian. You're making this about race. All these other fucking so-called liberals are making this about race and gender. I don't agree because I'm an egalitarian.
Yes, of course you are by definition still feeling the effects of that today, because we're talking about wealth that was passed down from generation to generation. If all you gotta do is go back one generation and there's no fucking wealth, you think we're still feeling the effects? Of course we're still feeling the effects.
There are black families, white families, Asian families, and Latino families, among all the other, ethnicities and all that have done well in this country by working hard. You can't make this race-based. You can't do that. If there have been people that have been, discriminated against, well, then speak to that individual person. When you make this based on race, you are not egalitarian. You are making a race-based argument. And this, again, you are bordering on white man's burden. Because white people have been successful, they owe black people something. When it's not true for all blacks and all whites. So long as there are rich black people and super poor whites, then it's not fair. It's not fair to go to those poor white people and say, you need to pay this rich black guy for something he's never suffered. That is fucking immoral. That is unjust. That is terrible, and it's racist. It's a racist argument.
And that's why liberals say, hey, look, man, we're in favor of equal opportunity. So in other words, you could strawman us all you want and say, oh, you're in favor of equality of outcome. No, we're not. We're not in favor of some insane version of utopian communism. We don't think that's the case. I've heard nobody on the left in the United States, prominent figure, argue for that.
So when you look at things like this benefit from the ESA, where they want to give anyone who's not a white male a means to have more money than before in order to pursue an education. If anyone but white men can pursue this, then how is this not racist? How is this not discriminatory? And how is this not to the benefit of people that are not white? You gotta fucking explain that one to me, man. So when you say equal outcome, you're goddamn right. Equal outcome. Because this isn't equal opportunity. This is discriminatory. And it's discriminatory in a way where you're giving equal outcome to specific racial groups, hoping to pursue equal outcome and parity in terms of wealth between races. I don't want Asian people who are doing better than me in society to pay me money. Asians don't owe me anything. Nobody owes me anything. I want that. I want that individualistic system where no one fucking owes me anything and I don't owe anybody anything outside of paying taxes. We all got to pay taxes. I'm fine with paying taxes and supporting the safety nets that are not discriminatory. But you got to address the fact that there are systems in this country that do not, and specifically do not, benefit white Americans. You can be just as much of a citizen as any other person, but because you're white, you don't benefit. Those systems exist in this country, and you and every other fucking dickhead white liberal don't want to talk about them because they undermine your collectivist, utopian, equal outcome viewpoint. Your obsession with parity. There is a difference between classes in this country, and it is a fucking problem. And I am more than willing to engage in that conversation about how unfair it is that, how much benefits the rich have in terms of taxes and, access and everything else that they have in this country because of, the connections that they have and everything else. I don't even want to get into it, but the point is that we can talk about class. We can talk about class, but again, you only are going to be able to do that from a perspective of class, not race. Because that's when it becomes an equal outcome, illegitimate fucking argument.
What we're saying is, okay, we want equality of opportunity. So in other words, in the race of life, you can't have the white community by and large. It's a 100-yard dash. White people run 80 yards in front and then turn around to black people and go, okay, you could start now. Well, you got an 80-yard head start. What the fuck's going on here? Oh, there you go complaining again. Fucking black people can't get their shit together. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What? But you are 80 yards in front there. Then you told them they could start running. So our point is that makes no sense.
You actually have to explain what is keeping black people, in your opinion, from being able to go at the same pace, if we're keeping the metaphor, as whites. You need to explain that. It's not on me, because I don't believe that fucking bullshit exists. There is discrimination. There is fucking racism and all of that, and cops are a problem in this country. And incarceration is a problem. But you've already sunk that argument in part because you've already said that cops discriminate against whites too, as long as they're poor. That the system discriminates against whites so long as they're poor. You've already made that argument. And yet at the same time, you're able to have this double think to say that no, actually white supremacy does exist. You gotta make up your motherfucking mind. Either the system is white supremacist or it isn't. Make up your fucking mind, asshole.
Now, when it comes to reparations, look, if they're talking about an apology, that should be the most obvious no-brainer ever. I mean, honestly, I honestly think even a lot of people who might even be admitted racists would say, yeah, you can apologize. There was slavery.
And we fought a fucking war over it. Jesus fucking Christ, bro. My ancestors had nothing to do with that system. Why do I need to explain this? Why do I need to explain something that is fucking patently obvious for anyone that isn't a fucking retard? Okay, now I'm actually starting to get angry. Who is apologizing and for fucking what?
So that's a no-brainer, okay? When it comes to other forms of it, would I be in favor of some sort of a transfer of wealth, where it's like a tax on white people and then you give it to black people? No, because then, again, how do you prove which families, own slaves, which families are the descendants of slaves? Do we really know for sure? There could be a lot of gaming of that system. Furthermore, there could be many poor white people, and you're going to tax the poor white people who also, in today's day and age, need a hand up. So that doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But if you just talk about something like debt relief, or you talk about something like, I don't know, maybe like a tax holiday or something for whatever the kid, 5 years, 10 years, or whatever it is, for to the best of your ability, trying to get the people who we know are descendants of slaves, and that's what they get. So either debt relief or a tax holiday for an extended period of time, where it's not a net subsidy and it's not redistribution from one person to another person, but it's just a break for that individual person. That's something different, and that's something I can see myself supporting.
Bull fucking shit, it's not redistribution, you fucking disingenuous asshole. I gotta pay taxes and they don't. That is fucking discriminatory. That is a subsidy, you fucking asshole. So are you saying that when rich people don't pay as much taxes as poor people, that's not a subsidy, that's not a benefit? Fuck off. Fuck off with your disingenuous argument. You're such a fucking cocksucker. You are such a non-committal fucking cocksucker. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too, and explain away the fact that you are in favor of reparations. You may not be in favor of me cutting a black person a check, but you still fucking support it. You still fucking support a so-called tax holiday for black people based on their race. Okay, that is a privilege. That is a benefit, and it is unearned.
But yeah, I do think it's an interesting conversation, and there is a lot to be said in the conversation, and I don't agree, even though many people are going to take this position, that, that's it, there should be no conversation, and any conversation, by definition, is, punitive of white people.
Right, you just tax them more. You tax white people more. That's not punishment. That's not punitive. You're just taxing them. Oh, I don't want to give them reparations. I just want to tax white people. That's so much different. That's so different from them cutting a check, is that we tax them more.
No, but it's not. I just described how I wouldn't be punitive to white people. But even discussing that issue is punitive to white people. But no, it's not. So, everybody take your guard down a little bit, have the conversation. You could be against it, but provide an actual good argument for being against it, as opposed to just shutting down and saying, it's stupid, Well, no, it's really not. And by the way, it's not like there isn't precedent for this historically. Look at what we did with Native Americans. They effectively get a form of reparations, tax-free casinos.
So this is a whole other fucking minefield of an argument when it comes to the Native Americans, who have never, ever stopped complaining. They can have the biggest monopoly over the casinos that they want. They can get away with fucking everything with their corrupt shithole governments. They live in squalor while their corrupt governments fuck them in the ass. And they still want to blame the white man. They hold monopolies on fucking casinos, money-making machines in so many fucking states. And yet they still bitch and moan. Don't pay any fucking taxes. Bitch and moan. And they still want reparations. They still want reparations. They want more from the poor working class, from Asians, from Latinos, from whites, people, and blacks. Them too, I almost forgot. They want reparations from everyone else. When they pay no taxes, they got all the benefits in the world from, although they don't really, through the corrupt governments. They still live in fucking squalor. Why don't you start looking up some statistics on addiction rates on reservations among everything else and poverty? Why don't you look up those fucking stats, you goddamn asshole? It's never good enough, and that's the problem with these cultures of victimhood, with these enclaves. We need to end segregation, whether it's the inner city or reservations. Segregation is a cancer, and collectivism is just fueling all of it.
So we did a genocide against them. After a while, we were like, hey, you know what? Our bad. You get reservations, sovereign territory, and you get tax-free casinos. Okay. Well, with black people, there still hasn't been perhaps enough done yet, and it's an interesting conversation to have, and one where we could try to find fruitful answers.
And there never will be. There will never be a time. It could be 5 generations later from now, and you're still going to have black people claiming that I am a racist, that my generation were all racist, that my parents' generations were all racist, that my grandkids' generation will all be racist. It will never be good enough for the cult of victimhood, because there's no fucking black community. Okay, there are black individuals. There are individuals. They are American citizens. You don't need to group them, okay? There are black Republicans that I have nothing in common with, really. There are black Democrats that I really have nothing in common with because of the crazy shit they believe. And so I think the best thing that could be done to the quote-unquote black community is to teach them individualism. Individualism is what they need. They don't need reparations. They need individualism. They need to understand egalitarian thinking and individualistic thinking and not collectivism and victim culture. That's the best fucking thing that can happen to that community, is to snap them out of this cult of victimhood. I don't go around complaining about the discrimination against Catholics fucking eons ago. I don't have to complain about how my grandfather was or wasn't discriminated against. He actually was, in some capacity, discriminated against. Do you hear me bitching and moaning to everyone about it? Do you hear the descendants of Irish immigrants and Italian immigrants and Polish immigrants and everyone else whining incessantly about the discrimination that happened fucking 100 years ago? Do you hear that anymore? No, you don't. End this cult of victimhood complex. End it. All of this is being fueled through collectivism and tribalism. That's what this is. It's a problem. It's a problem that has plagued the black community for generations. Is that the discrimination ended and all these different programs now exist to help, even in many cases specifically black people, where they discriminate against whites. And yet it's never good enough. It's never fucking good enough. We're never not living in a fucking white supremacist society. We're always going to be the fucking Nazis. White people are always going to be the fucking Nazis to blacks. And we're never ever going to not be. Thankfully, we have white liberals to perpetuate this collectivist victimhood dogma. Thankfully, we have white liberals that are not talking about every other goddamn thing they could be, from unionism to actual economic policy, to everything else in between. They could actually be talking about something worth talking about. They're too busy talking with the UN about fucking reparations for people that don't deserve them, based on race, based on racist discrimination. And that's where we're just going to leave this fucking commentary, because it's already long enough. And, again, I don't think I'll be able to convince Kyle, because I got angry. I think that's going to be it. It's always the etiquette. The etiquette of the white man. I get angry, and that's when it all goes out the window. Oh, now I can just fucking dismiss him. He doesn't have any points. I just went on a fucking long-ass tangent about dumb shit and spent half the time trying to equivocate, but he got angry. That's what makes him wrong. And we'll just end it there. Thanks for listening.